In the heart of the Whispering Woods, hidden beneath a canopy of ancient oaks, stood Hollow Manor. Once a grand testament to wealth and opulence, it had been abandoned for over a century, swallowed by time and tales. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, calling it a place where the past refused to stay buried. Legends of strange noises, ghostly figures, and eerie whispers surrounded the house, deterring all but the bravest or the most foolish. For Amanda Caldwell, an ambitious journalist with a knack for debunking supernatural myths, the manor was irresistible. This wasn't just another ghost story to her, it was a chance to cement her reputation as the truth seeker who dared to confront fear itself. Armed with a camera, recorder, and a skeptical mind, she set out for the manor on a crisp October evening, her breath mingling with the cool air as she crossed the iron gates. Once you enter Hollow Manor, you don't leave alone, the village innkeeper had told her. His warning played on a loop in her mind, growing louder as she stepped onto the overgrown path leading to the towering, decaying structure. The house loomed ahead, its broken windows staring like hollow eyes. Amanda hesitated for a moment, the weight of the stories pressing on her chest, but she shook off her unease, chalking it up to the power of suggestion, and pushed the heavy oak door open. The interior was even more foreboding. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust floated like ash in the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. Chandeliers hung precariously, their crystals catching faint glimmers of moonlight. The floor creaked under Amanda's boots as she moved cautiously through the foyer, her camera rolling. Hours passed as Amanda explored, documenting the peeling wallpaper, shattered furniture, and eerie portraits that lined the walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. But then she heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. It was soft at first, like a breeze brushing past her ear. But as she turned toward the sound, it grew louder, more distinct. Amanda, she froze. Her heart pounded as she scanned the room with her flashlight. No one was there. The whisper came again, the creaks of the wooden steps echoing in the vast emptiness. So at the top, she found herself in a long corridor lined with doors. Each one was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness. She chose one at random and stepped inside. The room was large, with a grand piano sitting at its center. Dust coated the keys, but the bench was oddly free of it, as if someone had been sitting there recently. She reached out and pressed a key. The sound was hollow, almost lifeless. But then, another key played, on its own. Amanda stumbled back, her pulse racing. The piano continued, its notes forming a melancholic melody that seemed to echo with sorrow. As she turned to leave, a child's voice filled the room. "Stay and play with me, Amanda." She spun around, but the room was empty. The voice came again, this time louder. Amanda bolted, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against it, her chest heaving. But the whispers followed her into the hallway, growing in number. "You can't leave. Stay with us. Forever." Amanda ran, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. But the hallway seemed endless, stretching farther with every step she took. Doors opened and closed on their own, revealing glimpses of otherworldly scenes. A woman sat in a rocking chair, cradling an empty bundle as she sang a haunting lullaby. A man in a tattered suit hung from the ceiling, his lifeless body swaying in an invisible breeze. The whispers grew into a cacophony, overlapping voices pulling her deeper into the house. Amanda finally stumbled into a grand ballroom, its one polished floor now covered in dust and debris. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. And then she saw them. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, men, women, and children, their faces pale and eyes hollow. They surrounded her, their expressions a mix of sorrow and malice. "You shouldn't have come here," one of them said, his voice reverberating like thunder. Amanda backed away, but the figures closed in. Their forms flickered like faulty projections, and yet their presence was suffocatingly real. Before she could scream, the air around her shifted. The room was no longer a decayed ballroom, but a vibrant, lively space filled with music and laughter. Ghostly figures danced in elegant gowns and tuxedos, their movements graceful yet unsettlingly mechanical. At the center of it all stood a woman in a crimson gown, her face obscured by a veil. She extended a hand toward Amanda, her voice soft yet commanding. "Join the dance, my dear. It's the only way to survive." Amanda hesitated, but the figures around her grew more aggressive, their hollow eyes burning with anger. With no other option, she took the woman's hand. The moment their fingers touched, the room shattered like glass, and Amanda was thrust into a new scene, a dark forest lit only by the glow of the moon. The woman stood before her, her veil now lifted to reveal a face both beautiful and horrifying. "The house is alive, Amanda," she said, "and it feeds on those who enter. You must find its heart and destroy it before it consumes you." Amanda awoke in the manor's foyer, her head pounding. She didn't know how much time had passed, but the urgency in the woman's words spurred her into action. She followed the whispers, which now seemed to guide her rather than torment her, until she found herself in the basement. There, at the center of the room, was an ornate chest, pulsing with a faint red glow. Amanda hesitated, the whispers growing louder, more desperate. "Destroy it," the voices urged. Summoning all her courage, she grabbed a rusted iron bar and swung it down with all her strength. The chest shattered, and a deafening scream filled the air as shadows burst forth, dissolving into nothingness. The sun was rising when Amanda stumbled out of the manor, her body trembling, but her spirit unbroken. She looked back to see the once menacing structure now crumbling into dust, as if its lifeline had been severed. But as she drove away, her rearview mirror revealed a faint figure in the distance, a woman in a crimson gown, watching her with a faint, knowing smile. In the depths of Blackthorn Woods, where sunlight rarely touched the earth, stood an ancient house shrouded in mystery, Blackthorn Manor. The villagers nearby spoke of it only when necessary, claiming it was cursed, a place where time stood still and the souls of the damned lingered. For over a century, no one dared to cross its crumbling threshold, save for those who never returned. This didn't deter Marcus Hale, an investigative reporter known for uncovering the truth behind urban legends. He'd faced so-called haunted locations before, leaving each one with a smug smile and a convincing exposé. When he heard the stories of Blackthorn Manor, about the Wailing Widow and the 13 Shadows, he was intrigued. Another ghost story to unravel, another myth to shatter. Armed with his recording equipment, Marcus set out on a moonless night, determined to spend the night in the manor. "No one lasts until dawn," the bartender had said the night before. "The whales will find you, and the shadows will keep you." Marcus laughed it off, but as he stood at the manor's grand, rotting entrance, the air itself seemed to push against him, heavy and oppressive. Still, he pressed forward. The interior was a study in despair and decay. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing cryptic symbols etched into the plaster. Furniture sat where it had been left decades ago, covered in thick layers of dust. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. Marcus set up his camera and began to explore, speaking into his recorder. Blackthorn Manor, October 15th. No signs of paranormal activity so far, just another abandoned house filled with creaks and drafts. But as he turned a corner into the grand hall, he noticed something odd. A chandelier hung above, its crystals gleaming faintly, as though reflecting light that wasn't there. Below it, a table was set with tarnished silverware and broken plates. Among the debris, a single porcelain teacup sat upright, untouched by dust. Curious, Marcus picked it up. The moment he did, a soft hum filled the air, like a woman singing just out of earshot. He set the cup down and turned toward the sound. The hum grew louder and, leading him toward the drawing room. Inside, a grand piano stood against the wall, its keys yellowed with age. Marcus's flashlight beam flickered, and for a brief second, he thought he saw someone sitting at the piano, their hands poised over the keys. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Ignoring the chill creeping up his spine, Marcus began filming. Drawing room. No signs of anything unusual apart from a draft. The supposed Wailing Widow isn't much of a hostess. No sooner had he spoken than the piano played a single note. The sound resonated through the room, deep and mournful. Marcus laughed nervously. A draft must have hit the keys. But then the piano played again, this time a melody, slow and deliberate. The notes seemed to call to him, pulling him toward the piano. When he reached it, he noticed the sheet music laid out. It was blank. The air grew colder, and the humming returned, louder now, echoing around him. Marcus spun around, his flashlight catching the edge of a figure, a woman in a tattered black dress, her face hidden by a veil. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice shaky. The figure didn't move, but her humming turned into a soft, sorrowful wail. Then she whispered, "He is watching!" Marcus backed away, but the woman vanished before his eyes. His heart pounded as he stumbled into the hallway. The house was no longer silent. Footsteps echoed above him, and faint voices drifted through the walls. He pulled out his recorder, desperate for some semblance of control. Something's happening. It's not just the house settling. I saw her, the widow. A loud crash interrupted him, followed by a child's laughter. It came from upstairs. Against his better judgment, Marcus ascended the grand staircase, each step creaking ominously.
The hallway above was lined with doors, each one slightly ajar. From one room, he heard the laughter again, joined by a faint, rhythmic tapping. He pushed the door open to find a nursery.
Inside, a rocking horse swayed on its own, the tapping sound coming from its wooden hooves hitting the floor. A doll sat in the corner, its painted eyes staring directly at Marcus. He stepped closer, and the laughter echoed again, but this time it came from behind him. He turned, only to see a small boy standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and unblinking. "You shouldn't be here," the boy said. Before Marcus could respond, the boy vanished, leaving behind only the sound of footsteps running down the hall. Panic began to set in. Marcus knew he had to leave, but the house seemed to shift around him. Doors led to rooms he hadn't seen before, hallways stretched into infinity, and the voices grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Then, he found himself back in the grand hall. The chandelier above him swayed violently, though there was no wind. The wail returned, deafening now, and the shadows in the room began to move, twisting into humanoid shapes with glowing eyes. "You don't belong here," the shadows hissed in unison.
The wailing grew into a scream, and the figures advanced. Marcus tried to run, but the air itself seemed to hold him in place. Desperate, he remembered the symbols he'd seen etched into the walls. Pulling out his flashlight, he shone it on the nearest one and began tracing it with his fingers.
As he completed the symbol, a blinding light filled the room and the shadows recoiled, shrieking. The air grew still and the voices ceased. When Marcus opened his eyes, he was standing outside the manor, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. Blackthorn Manor stood silent once more, its windows dark and lifeless. Marcus didn't know how he'd escaped, but he had no intention of going back to find out. As he drove away, his rear-view mirror revealed a fleeting image of the veiled woman standing at the manor's gate. She raised a hand as if in farewell before fading into the morning mist.